Welcome back. I'm here with Jaidree, and this is particularly exciting for me because you are my agent. And as people who know me know, I self-published 11 books before this upcoming book, which isn't going to be available until like 2025, but called The Obvious Choice. I self-published 11 books before this book now is going to be my first traditionally published book. And during that whole process, I've always been really interested in whether you should self-publish, whether you should conventionally publish, who it's right for, who it's not right for. If you decide to conventionally publish, like, what do you look for in an agent? How do you find them? What do they look for? What makes a successful book? What makes a good agent? And it's crazy, Jaidree, that I have tried so much to find like resources on this type of stuff. And I've listened to podcasts and things, but I haven't been able to find like an agent doing work on a big scale that actually talks about this stuff. I've been able to find a lot of like marketing agencies talking about it, which is fine. Why aren't there more agents? Are you just super busy?
That is a great question. And first of all, I'm also thrilled to be here talking to you and your audience and just love everything that you do, obviously. So, but yeah, I mean, I think one of the big challenges of publishing is that it is such an insular industry. We tend to not talk about what a job in publishing looks like. I mean, people think if they want to get into publishing, they're going to be an editor. They don't really know what agents do. They don't really know what agents look for. And I don't know why that is, but I do think it's important that we share these resources as much as we possibly can. I do a lot of talks at like writing conferences and stuff, but there aren't a lot of like interesting podcast hosts reaching out to agents saying what is the book publishing industry like. And so yeah, I think this is a really important conversation to be having.
So what do you look, because this is the number one question that I got asked over and over again. I was like, because I share the process a little bit of just, I always share, I'm an overshare. So I share the process a fair bit on social media because I find that helps me selfishly keep going, sharing what I'm doing. And I don't even care most of the time whether anybody responds to it or gives feedback or, likes it. It's just it's almost like my diary. And maybe this comes from the fitness industry, just like posting your workout on the internet because it only counts if you post it on the internet. I don't know. But I got asked so many times, like, how do you find an agent? So I kind of want to start there and then work backwards to some of the other questions of self-publishing, conventional publishing, purely because I get asked that so often. And my answer is, I don't really know. I feel like we just kind of met at an event.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's not unusual. I think, the way that we met at an event, I saw you speak, like knew you were speaking there too, and knew of your success with your self-publishing. So had a bit of background in that respect. But I will say, in nonfiction, there's kind of different paths to getting an agent for fiction versus nonfiction. And I think fiction tends to be a little bit more straightforward in that you like write a novel and you submit it to agents and they review it and they say whether they like it or not. They want to take it on and edit it with you. You can win awards, blah, blah, blah. But nonfiction tends to be a little bit different in that agents in the nonfiction space are looking for experts who should be writing books. A lot of times we're reaching out to people who haven't considered writing a book yet. So we're like, I'll reach out to someone who has like a brand new research paper or something. And I'm like, oh my God, this is really impressive. And I want to talk about it. And I want to see if this should be a book. So that's one way that people get to nonfiction agents. We find them. The other way.
How do you have time to do that though? I mean, how do you have time to do that?
I just have to stay every agent will answer this differently, but I have a lot of newsletters that I like where I'm like, okay, I know that Quartz, for instance, has great stories about people who are doing interesting things. I follow good podcasts. I know that there are certain podcast hosts who are really good at finding people who are doing interesting research or interesting things. And I know that if someone's on their podcast, then they're probably doing something cool that they might want to write a book about. But if you're someone who is like, I want to be writing a book, I have expertise in some area and want to be writing a nonfiction book. Probably the fastest way is to talk to any of your friends who have written a book. and ask them if they like their agent.
Yeah.
And that's because a lot of my current clients were referrals from my previous clients or other current clients. Um, and then, of course, there's always the queries inbox. The queries inbox is hard. It's you look up, you can find out who agented the favorite books that you've read. I think this is probably the best way to start, by looking at the acknowledgments in a book.
Yep.
So if you have favorite books that you're like, I wish I could publish a book like this, read the acknowledgments, see who the publisher was, see who the agent was. Then you can look up the agent online. You can see their queries process. Every agent will have really clear rules about how to query them. But yeah, the path of least resistance is talking to your friends who publish books if you have them.
Try to get some sort of an introduction. And I did. I mean, I think I told you I there was one agent that I spoke to before you, and it was an introduction through a friend of mine, and I spoke to his agent, and it just wasn't a good fit. It wasn't a good fit on either. She wasn't looking for books like the one that I was writing at the time, but yeah, it was a very quick introduction, and you could tell that she really respected the person who made the introduction to me and was happy to talk to me about it. And it was pretty quick. We figured out it wasn't a fit, but she was happy to talk to me about it. Okay, so that's cool. So I want to highlight something that I love about that, actually. Not even necessarily related to like book publishing, but just information gathering and just building these systems around of saying, okay, this is the type of information that I want to take in. Where are all of the spots that are already producing this type of thing? Like you mentioned, there are certain newsletters, there are certain podcasts that already do a very good job. Their full-time job is to seek out this interesting new stuff. Cool. You can just follow those few, and it's basically like all of these full-time workers working for you, discovering these things for you. I think that's such a beautiful thing to do. I mean, I used to do that in the fitness industry when I was trying to improve as a personal trainer. I had a Feedly account, which was just an RSS feed, but it was the same type of thing. It just showed when there was ever an update to a blog. And on my Feedly account was that type of thing. There were certain PubMed resources, so certain new research resources, in addition to bloggers and stuff that made an effort to find new things. And it feels like you're almost cheating to others. Mm-hmm. They're like, how are you finding this stuff first? It's like, well, I just did a better job of creating my circle of discovery while you were like doom scrolling Instagram.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, a circle of discovery is a great way to put that. I think one thing that people overestimate is just like how much work you need to do to find things when like probably there are other people already looking for those things.
Yeah.
And if you can kind of combine your resources, whether you're just following them or actively working with them, that's a great way to expand your knowledge really easily.
So talk to me about, let me ask you the single terrible question that you get asked all the time. Should I write a book? Just because I want to see what your answer is to this.
Well, you should definitely write a book, and you already are. So good job.
Sure.
But I think the question that a lot of people have is they come at it as, should I work with a publisher? Can I get money for this book? Whereas what a publisher is asking is, they're not even asking like, does this book need to be written? They're saying like, is this the person to write the book? Is this an idea that feels fresh and interesting in some new angle, some new take in a way that feels right? And then do they have the resources to sell this book? Once the platform, the expertise, the media interest, whatever that thing is, how are people going to find out about the book once it's written, right? Like we can all write beautiful books, and then if no one finds them, it doesn't matter.
Sure. So, and some of that, I mean, can happen randomly, but it's pretty rare for that. So what were those three? So the first is basically like a new, fresh idea or angle on the idea.
Yeah,
what was
exactly.
The second one? Because I want to dive into all three of those.
Yeah, of course. So the second one is like, is this the person who should be writing the book? Which is, I think people confuse that with the third one, which is, do I have the resources to sell this book? And is the person to write the book is more, do you have unique access to the information in some way or another?
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's dive into those three because I feel like that's the beginnings of a really effective framework.
Hmm.
And if you're somebody who's thinking about writing a book, who wants to write a book, who wants to get their knowledge out on the big scale for any reason that you want to do, we'll talk about the good reasons, potentially not as good reasons in a little bit, but this framework I think is really effective for saying where am I there and where am I not quite there yet in terms of where I want to build myself up to the point to get there to write this book. So, do you have a new, fresh idea?
Yeah. I mean,
What does
that's,
that mean?
yeah. And I actually like to say that there's always room for quality, you know? So a lot of times people think, oh, like this has been written before. Or
Yeah.
I have an idea, especially in leadership, business management, there's like tried and true advice, right? And we talked about this with the obvious choice too, right?
Like,
There's tried and true advice that's pretty much out there. It's out there 10 times in 10 different books, right? But the
that's put
key
out
is,
20 times a day.
yeah, yeah, exactly. The key is, do you have a way of framing it if you're talking about something that's kind of that's not brand new under the sun, which most things aren't? Do you have a way of framing it that's going to be accessible to people in a new way? Because yeah, it's out there 20 million times, but there are still a lot of people who haven't heard it. And maybe they're
Yeah.
going to hear it from you and it's finally going to resonate. And so do you have a way of framing that? And I think the obvious choice has been a way of framing some great new concepts and then some older concepts of like of saying, okay, this is a new way to think about these things that is potentially going to resonate with people who either haven't heard them before or who have heard them before but didn't take them in. And then now they're finally going to get it and hear it. So that's kind of what I mean by there's always room for quality or a new take.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, or I wouldn't even say this isn't or distracted by things that are shinier at
Mhm.
this exact moment in time, that their presence makes them seem like they're more important than they are. So I think about that a lot with algorithmic spikes or
Yes.
a lot of advice kind of provided to influencers and things like that, which is not bad advice, but it's bad advice for a lot of people who are trying to grow a business. It's not bad
Yes.
advice if you're trying to get famous on the internet. And those things may have some crossover, but they're not necessarily related. But a lot of that stuff is so in our face that it distracts us from these timeless principles that really are just like more boring because we just kind of accept that they're true. But it's like, yo, but you're not doing them.
Right.
And you're also frustrated and burnt out. So maybe you should focus on the stuff you know works and not the stuff in your face. So that's it seems to me that at any one point in time there always seems to be things that we feel like we should do,
Yes.
but in the great scheme of things, everybody kind of knows that they're probably not that important. But it's very easy to talk about. And you and I have spoken about this a lot, haven't we? Of just the difference between information that's easy to teach and the difference between actually useful information and being careful of the difference between the two. So this idea of a new, fresh idea doesn't mean that you've come up with something that's brand new. I mean, so here's what's interesting. So you introduced me to Dr. Gloria Mark, who's fabulous, who I interviewed, who's a part of the summit. And if you haven't listened to her speak, I definitely recommend it. So she's the chancellor's professor at the University of California, Irvine campus. And her study, her area of research is attention and focus, and its crossover with technology. Okay, great. What she said, based off of her leading research in the field, was almost identical to what somebody else who I interviewed in the summit, Don Dapani, who was a Hindu priest who lived on a Hindu monastery for 10 years, who's been a good friend of mine for like a decade, who wrote a book. He had a TED Talks with over 6 million views, wrote a book called Unwavering Focus, whose area of study and of teaching is also focus.
Mm-hmm.
And what he said, based off of timeless Buddhist or timeless Hindu principles, was almost identical to what Dr. Gloria Mark was saying with her leading research on
Yep.
what she calls informatics.
Mm-hmm.
they're both completely different takes on the same subject, and they're both really, really effective for different people. So, but they both take their own background, um, and they're both really fresh ideas.
Yeah, and
So,
that's
what's your
really
fresh
important.
idea?
Yeah, exactly. What's your fresh idea? And it is important to be authentic to your background too, right? I think a lot of people come in and they're trying to figure out like, oh, I need to do some big, like you said, some big shiny thing to
Right.
like define themselves, to make themselves attractive to a publisher. And what's really going to work at the end of the day, and for publishing a book, I think especially people are going to spend 10, 20 hours reading this book, they're going to tell at some point if you're faking it.
Yeah.
So I
It's
think
hard. It's hard to fake it for 60,000 words.
exactly. So yeah, you want this lesson, whatever it is that you're sharing in your book, and most of my books are lesson driven, the authors that I work with. So whatever that lesson is, you want it to be based in your lived experience. We'll get into this on the like unique access to information piece, but like
Right.
lived experience, your research, your whatever it is, that thing that got you interested in it in the first place is probably what's going to get other people interested in it too. So
And they'll connect with you because of that. I
exactly.
mean, I think about even the best selling books in the world
Hmm.
and how small of a percentage of the population actually reads them. Even the reading population,
Yeah.
how small of a percentage of them read them. There is a lot of space in this market, isn't there? And there's a lot of opportunity in this market. It's Allison and I went on a date night last night to celebrate. And one of the things that we were talking about was just how interesting it is that books, with all of the disruption that's taken place in the last number of years, books still hold this esteemed value in our mind. If somebody's written a book, if somebody's been published, right,
Hmm.
there's this like deep, profound respect for that. And the fact that everything that's happened with the digital revolution hasn't, if anything, it's strengthened it, certainly hasn't displaced it in any way, just shows how powerful it is and how much staying power books have.
Hmm.
It's really been it surprised a lot of folks, I think.
I think so too. And it's funny. I mean, so I have a master's in publishing, which if you're trying to get into publishing, you don't actually need, but I'm glad I got it. But when I was when I was in my
That's like when people ask me if they should write a book. I'm like, I don't recommend it.
right. I've
I
done
do
11.
it, but
I
I
don't
don't
need to.
recommend it.
Yep. Like, if you're trying to get into publishing, you don't need a master's. I happen to have one, but during my master's thesis and doing this time aside now 10 years ago, I actually did my thesis on like whether or not ebooks were going to overtake print
Oh
books.
wow!
And I was trying to do a lot of research on it. And I actually cited some of Gloria's research. It was the first
Can
time
you
I'd been
send me
exposed
that
to
afterwards? I want
her.
to read
Yeah,
your
again.
thesis. Okay.
Oh my God, I'll have to find it. I don't know if I'm proud of it at this point, but I will. I will share it with you if I am. But yeah, and what I kind of hinged it on, and this is how I actually again discovered some of Gloria's research, was this idea of our dwindling attention and the kind of conventional wisdom at the time. It was like we had this rising spike in ebook sales in the market, and everyone was like, "Oh my God, no one can focus on print books anymore. They're just going to go straight to the ebooks. They want things they can read on their phones, blah, blah, blah." And I kind of came back to like, it's actually really hard to read. Like the reading experience on a screen is just not
Yeah.
the same as the reading
Yeah.
experience in a print book. And there's a bunch of research that backs this up. Gloria's is some of it, that reading on a screen is just more distracting, whether you're getting notifications or not. And yeah, I think that has borne out over the years since that print books have held steady, ebooks have fallen, audio has taken off for different reasons. But as a format, I think there's something about print books and the feeling of them, the fact that you can have them in your back, like
That's
as a
great.
decoration in your home. There's something about them that's like it feels esteemed, that feels
Yeah.
real, and I think people are attracted to that.
I hate reading on my Kindle.
Yeah,
I have one because I travel so much,
same.
but I really don't like reading on it. But when I do read on it, I have to set it a certain way or else I can't stand it. And the little part on the bottom, I have to set to tell me how many minutes are left at the end of the chapter.
Oh, mm-hmm.
Because to me, part of what helps me read a book is the analog status bar. Knowing how many pages are left at the end of that chapter, knowing how many pages are in the book. The book gets thicker on the left, thinner on the right. As you're reading the thing, that's a status bar, right? Like that's a consumption habit. And that doesn't exist with a Kindle, with the digital thing. And so I have to almost recreate that. And I have found that books with very, very long chapters, I can't make it through.
Interesting.
On Kindle. Doesn't matter about the length of the book. I've read like fantasy series that are 2,500, 3,000, 3,500 pages long on Kindle. Doesn't matter about the length of the book. It's the length of the chapter on a digital device.
Interesting.
That I find I can't make my way through. Okay, number 2. Yeah. So number 2 in this framework. So the first was new, fresh idea, right? The second one is the person who should be writing this book.
Yeah.
It's interesting. Tell me.
Yes. And this is a phrase that I've said a couple times now that I actually borrowed from an editor a few years ago, which is unique access to information. And I think that encapsulates many different ways to get to become the person to write the book. So you can have unique access to information through lived experience if you're, writing a memoir, sure, but or you've had experience with teaching a lot of people, coaching a lot of people in a certain method. Like there's that experience of having worked with other humans, having lived something kind of stunning, gone through wrongful incarceration or something like that. Like these are some ways to have unique access to information. You can be a PhD researcher who is doing kind of groundbreaking edge of the field research. And now your original research is your unique access to that information. And you can also build it through business experience, right? Like you can build it by being a coach for 20 plus years, or you work with a specific type of client and you are the expert in coaching that type of person. And you have unique client stories, you have unique methods that you use to teach those people. These are all different ways to get that, that unique access to information that'll make your book special.
We ran into this a lot with my book.
Mm-hmm.
With the publishers who were interested in it. Overwhelmingly, the question that came up was some variation of this book is for everybody very clearly. We need to basically be convinced that you're not just a fitness guy.
Mm-hmm.
And I was surprised at how much I got that question from publishers, because it's pretty obvious that like my platform has expanded like pretty far out of that, and that but also that these principles are so universally applicable, and they knew that, but they still had a very hard time figuring out, okay, how are we going to position this in this person, mm-hmm. right, to this audience outside of it. Which you and I kind of laughed about a little bit secretly, because we're just like, this is the obvious choice. Like, this is literally what this book is about how you go narrow, not wide, use the advantages there, burst at the seams, and then systematically expand out.
Yes, exactly.
That's like what we're talking about in the book. But this idea of the person who should be writing the book, you need to become that person. Mm-hmm. And there's nothing wrong if you're not that person yet.
Yeah.
But how can somebody, assume that we're not talking to like a researcher working at a university. Yeah. Okay. We're talking to somebody who has done just a really good job in, call it even like a local business, or with their people that they serve, but not on like a global scale. Like they've just done like a phenomenal job doing all of the right things, all of the right ways. And now they want to share that information on a bigger scale. What are some steps that they can take then to become the person in the eyes of the gatekeepers that should be writing this book?
Yeah, that is a great question. And I think it does come back also to, what is the book? All of these things intertwine. But I think you can, if you have been running successfully a small business or a local business or have built kind of a social platform around an idea, odds are you're getting feedback from people, your
Yeah.
customers, clients, followers. And I think that feedback's really important because when you identify the thing that they're saying that is, oh, I've never heard this from anyone else, or
Yeah.
you get the question over and over again, like, what question comes to you the most often, right? Like, what the repeated
Oh
question
yeah.
is, or yeah, or what the reaction when your answer to like the unexpected answer is when people go, oh my God, I've never thought of it that way. That's the things that you want to be looking out for, the things that make people go, oh my God, I've never thought of it that way. Or
Yes.
I've worked with a bunch of other coaches, for instance, and have never heard or have never made progress before because
Yeah.
of XYZ, but you changed me in this way. I think that people maybe undervalue the current audience when they're trying to grow their audience. They're like, I need to, we talked about this a lot too, right? Like the fitness audience is a great audience. Like
Oh.
that is, and that's a lot of people, and people who want to buy books too, and are
There's a
really
lot of people
interested.
who exercise.
Yes,
like enough people who exercise some way.
exactly,
Yeah.
and who are interested enough in that they want to learn more about it and are willing to pay for it. Right?
Right.
Like there are enough people to build a core audience around that. And if we kind of took like the traditional publishing path of saying, okay, well, yes, I'm from a fitness background, but this is really, really for everyone. And let's lean so hard into this is for everyone. I actually think that wouldn't ring true. I think one of the
Mm.
things that publishers responded really well to in your messaging was like, yeah, the fitness audience is my core audience, has been. And here's why that works. And here's
Right.
why that's special to me. And here's why I'm going to activate it in a way that will attract other people too.
Right.
And I think that's the key transition, I think, is figuring out what's special but with your current audience. They'll tell you if you listen. And then figuring out how to, when you see kind of a path to extrapolate that out to other people, that's usually how you start becoming the obvious choice and the person to write a book.
Yeah. It's funny because I've never even thought about it that way that you just said it, but that makes sense. The idea that you don't ignore your existing audience. You, if anything, figure out a way to go deeper with people like that.
Yep.
And if your work is good enough, it will begin to expand outwards.
Yes.
But the way to achieve that is actually to go deeper with your existing people. And we see this. I mean, the famous example, of course, is The Motion and Andy Weir's work. It's in fiction, but similar. That book was written for free, chapter by chapter online, to basically space geeks. And then it was just so good that it expanded, outwards. That line that you said, I've never thought of it that way, I put in quotes. I think if you're listening, that's the key. What are things that you say to people where either their body language or their words literally say, I've never thought of it that way, where something that you're able to teach them or show them or talk to them about helps them discover an unobvious truth that the minute that they hear it said that way immediately becomes obvious to them.
Yep.
You know it when you hear it. What you said to me, and here's the hard thing about this, is that you're probably an expert in your thing, and it's already obvious to you.
Yes.
So it's hard to identify. One of the things that you said to me, but one of the big things that really jumped out at you from the first couple chapters that I sent you in the book, was when I gave the percentage conversion rate with it was a fitness person. I think I called her Jessica in the book. It's not her real name, but I called her Jessica in the book. But she had 20 point something thousand followers and 6 customers. And her conversion rate was 0.02%. And that's an example to me of mapping it out. Well, to me, it's of course, it's, what are we doing here? you don't need prettier photos. Like, that's not the problem that needs to be solved. Obvious to me, but the second that I put that as a percentage conversion rate, you jumped out and you were just like, this to me made clear something that I kind of knew but couldn't articulate or make sense of. And to me, it was just, that was like, I wouldn't say a throwaway section, but not a major section. So look for those things. Okay, and then the last piece of this framework, right? So we have new, fresh idea, the person who should be writing the book, and then the last piece of this framework is the resources to sell the thing.
Yeah.
This is the part nobody wants to talk about, right?
It's true. Yeah. And I think this is more often than not. I mean, I take a lot of calls with people who want to write books. I'm always happy to do advice calls. And I think that my most common advice is, yeah, this is a great idea. I think that you're doing all the right work. We still need to grow this platform or reach or something before I'm going to be able to sell it to a publisher. For the money that you want, or get the investment from a publisher that will make it a meaningful experience for you to publish a book with a publisher too. Because that's a piece of it, right? Like, people think about it, an advance is money, but an advance is an investment from the publisher. And we actually really want to think of that as like them showing you that they want to get in this partnership with you. And how do we present that in a way that makes them make that biggest investment in a very meaningful way?
And you don't want to trick them.
We don't want to trick them. No.
Like even if you could, you don't want to trick them, because it's just going to come and bite you in the ass. Like, good job, you got a little bit of extra money, but like, what happens next is no publisher ever wants to work with you ever again.
Yeah.
I mean, you have to deliver on the commitment, don't you?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, like, I think that's kind of and I'll come back to the platform question in a second, but I think that's been part of my own maturing process as an agent, which was as a young agent, you're like, I need to sell this book for as much money as possible. And I need to set this person up to be able to tell a publisher, get as many publishers interested as possible, get as much money as possible. That is my job, kind of thing. And I've realized, and you realize this over the course of working on many publications, that is not the end goal. Obviously, yes, we still want to get the best advances from the best publishers, but that second part is really key, from the best publishers, because I don't want to set someone up to not be able to deliver, first of all, because I can sell a book. I can tell a publisher what they need to hear to make them want to buy your book. If you can't deliver on that, it's going to be a miserable experience for you. It's going to be a miserable experience for the publisher. And then you're probably not going to get a second book deal if that's what your goal is. But also, you want to find the right publisher. And if you're not representing yourself accurately, you're not going to attract the right publisher. You want the person who's truly invested in your vision as the true vision. And there are editors who will respond to that. And sometimes it's better to get only 3 interested publishers versus 10 if you're getting the right 3 versus the wrong 10. So that's like a little bit of that background. But in terms of platform, publishers, the state of the market now is that publishers rely on authors to sell the book. The publishers do a lot of things, and we can get into that as well. We'll talk about self-publishing and traditional publishing, but it's really like people come to books because they like the author, or they connected the author with the author in some way or another. And publishers know that now, and they just need to see that. They need to see a demonstration of that connection. Again, if you're someone who's kind of a media personality or a researcher, that a certain amount of media attention will sell the book. But if you are someone who is more on the business side, I've built a small local business, or I've been coaching people, or I've been doing this kind of more direct work, and I'm ready to share it larger. That has to be driven by speaking engagements. How many people are you speaking in front of? How many people are you reaching via social media? How many email subscribers do you have? And I think a really important piece of that is not just how many people are following you, but how many people are buying from you. And publishers have wised up to that too. 6 years ago, I could sell a book by saying this person has 1 million followers on Instagram. Now, they're asking me better questions like how
Yeah.
engaged, what are they selling, who's on their email list, what's like, show us that people aren't just tapping like on their photos, show us that people will buy their book, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. Are you really good? I talk about this in the Obvious Choice book. What are you actually legitimately referred to as an expert in this subject?
Yes.
You know, call it a thought leader, or are you just really good at entertaining around this subject?
Mm-hmm.
And neither is better or worse, but they are radically different from one another. If you're really good at entertaining around a subject, you're funny, you're good to look at, you're a great dancer, whatever. Maybe you're just like really good at like communicating complex ideas simply, which could be something that people pay for, but it's there's no proof there that anybody actually looks at you as a real expert to actually buy anything from you.
Right.
And so you're playing an entertainment game, which has very long time horizons, which is an outlier game where certain few are going to really win at the top. Most are going to work for a very, very long time and get frustrated. You know, you're going to go to Hollywood, you're going to wait tables for 10 years hoping that your dreams are going to come true, and for a few they will,
Yeah.
but for most they won't. And if you understand the rules of engagement in the thing and you sign up for them knowingly, totally cool. But you can't justifiably expect the rewards of one while doing the actions of the other. And that's just the main message.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about self-publishing versus conventional publishing.
Yeah.
I'd actually, you and I haven't really talked about this that much. I'd actually be interested to hear from you. When should somebody explore self-publishing, and when should somebody explore traditional publishing?
Yeah. I mean, so I think it'll be helpful actually to just go back to the conversation that we were having earlier about how we tell publishers, um, one, that your audience will buy books from you,
Right.
and right, and two, that you can reach beyond your audience. Because I think, it's a key that, to go back to the fitness example, there are a lot of books in publishing and categories in publishing that um, haven't worked super well for traditional publishers, and fitness is one of them. They've struggled. They've like a lot of publishers have struggled to find the right fitness book. Some books have really broken out. Kelly
Yeah.
Starrett, like all these, like that really do well. But there are, for every one that broke out, there's 1,000 that didn't. And I think
So
that
you said, sorry, just
yeah,
to clarify that, just a lot of publishers have had historically. I'm putting words in your mouth. Tell me if I'm true. I don't know if this is true or not. You're saying that a lot of books historically in the fitness industry, publishers have had high hopes about and have disappointed. Is that kind of what you mean?
yeah, or they've bought them and then the book didn't perform. It didn't sell
Okay.
on the back end in the way that they hoped.
Okay.
And
Okay.
I think there are a lot of reasons for that. I mean, the kind of traditional like exercise book is not really a thing anymore because of the
Sure.
internet. And if you can take an online course with someone, why would you not do that instead? But there's a lot of reasons for that. But there is some like so a route to self-publishing is often if you're in a kind of niche space and publishers are like this, like you'll talk to agents, you'll talk to a few different people and they'll say this feels really niche, but that you
Yeah.
have a huge audience in this very niche space, right? You know that you have 100,000 person email list who are waiting for this book. It might not be worth it for you to try to convince a publisher that audience is there. It might just be easier to self-publish it and sell it directly to that email list that you have that is going to show up for it. And then, down the line, you can go back to a publisher and say, "Hey, I've actually sold all these books to this audience." And
Right.
that's when they can look at it and say, "Oh, okay." One thing I tell people a lot is like publishers are big ships to steer. They're kind of unimaginative. So as much like demonstration as you can do for them
Yep.
is how you get them to invest in you. They don't take a lot
Which
of
is not a
unfounded
it's
bets.
not a bad thing. I mean,
Right.
they have to be that way.
Yep.
Um, it would be hard for them to do what they do at the scale that they do it at,
Exactly.
to open up for imagination too often,
Yeah.
I would think.
Exactly. Yeah. But the key is that niche, that feeling that it's that you're writing something for a very specific audience, and even if you know it's a really big audience, the publisher might not believe you. That's usually a
Yeah.
sign that you should self-publish first.
Yeah, so it's almost a way. I mean, if you do decide that you want to eventually traditionally publish, it's almost like proving yourself and proving the market a little
Yep.
bit. I mean, I said that to how many of the publishers that we spoke
Yeah.
to in our meetings. I'm like, when they asked me, "Hey, you've successfully self-published. Like, why are we talking to you? Like, why don't you just keep doing that?" I'm like, well, you wouldn't be talking to me if I didn't self-publish first, would you?
Yeah.
like, I kind of had to do that to get here.
Yes.
And I always knew that I'd want to get here, but I had to sell a couple 100,000 books in order for you to talk to me.
Yeah.
Maybe
Yeah.
not quite that many for that long, but like you kind of have to. But that's interesting that to do it for niche. So are you kind of saying then that if your market is larger, you may not need to prove yourself in the same way, or if the market is not necessarily larger, but a market that like self-help, right? Like a market that just traditionally just sells a lot of books. You don't need to
Yeah,
prove yourself the
exactly.
same way.
Yeah, exactly. I think you yeah, I mean, it's helpful to talk to agents and kind of get that assessment too, because this is such a, the anyone who has queried agents will have heard the line "publishing is a subjective industry," because it is, and every single
Sure.
agent's going to have a different take on that. But I do think there is something as a general rule to be said. Like, if your audience is demonstrably large and broad, then we can make a case that they will buy books from you. If you are publishing into a kind of niche thing, especially in business, especially if you're giving business advice, there are so many giant popular business books, but there's still this kind of, I don't know, underlying assumption that a niche business book is hard to sell. So that's also just another kind of sign that you might want to try self-publishing
Well,
first.
I mean, it's a problem of the long tail, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Where you're not just competing against other books that come out at that time now. I mean, you're competing against Think and Grow Rich by
Right.
Napoleon Hill. In the business niche, I think particularly if you're coming out with a business book, like business books don't fall off the New York Times bestseller list very often.
They don't.
Once they become the go-to recommended thing, they're pretty cemented there. Uh, so it's hard to kind of break through and create more space. Um, I mean, it's kind of I joked about this with one of the other speakers I was talking to, how we can both look at people and be like, I know exactly what book you just read based off of what they're doing, on like how they're marketing or like the language they're speaking on the internet. It's just like I can tell you exactly the book that you just read because there's just not that many. I had a manager back when I was postal training, when I was like the senior trainer. It's just way back when, right? And I was studying the manager. I actually have notes on my computer still, like notes on management, because stuff that he did, I would talk about like how I felt, how I didn't feel, and I would go home and I would go to the library and find all the big books on management and stuff, and I would read them. It's when I learned I didn't want to be a manager, but that's a whole different story. But he would. It was interesting because I knew what books he was reading because I had already read them,
Yes.
and so I knew what he was doing. And he was the type of guy who he did everything like to the letter. There was no creativity. There was no. It was just like to the letter. And so he got on this thing one time. This book that I don't remember what book it was, but this book that he read. It said the advice in it was you always ended every engagement with a staff member by thanking them, and that had to be the last word. Was you had to show gratefulness to them, and so if you thanked them and they said anything else, you had to then thank them again.
Oh my gosh.
And so I was just like, I'm a mess with this guy. So we just go back and forth. He'd be like, John, thank you so much for meeting with me. I'm like, well, thank you for the job that you do, dude. Well, you know what? I saw that you helped out, a new member today, and I just really appreciate that. So thank you. Well, you're doing such a great job bringing new members into the gym. So and we just go back and forth.
Oh my God.
But you can kind of tell these things because there aren't that many books in that kind of field. It's like,
Yeah.
oh, you just read Thinking Fast and Slow. Like,
Yeah. And
I
that's
get it.
so true, and that's become more true recently. Actually, there's we get a lot of statistics on the books market, and um, so the backlist are books that published more than a couple months ago. So
Okay.
anything that's previously published, and front list are generally books that are coming out soon or just recently published. Um, the market share of backlist books has increased so much in the last couple of years, and there's something to do with the pandemic and so reading trends and a bunch of other things. People are actually having a hard time explaining it, but I think it was in like 2015 to 2017ish, it was like 50 to 55% of the market was backlist. It's now 70 to 72% is backlist,
Wow.
so it's very hard to break out as a
Yeah.
new author.
It seems like a lot of it has to do with these like social media accounts and stuff like that, where a lot of their content, it's way easier to create content talking about something that's already popular. And so there's all of these accounts that are just firing out post after post after post. They're just going after all of the popular books and basically summarizing them, um, because they get more views if they do that versus talking about something that's like discovery or new. Okay, I want to talk about traditional publishing now.
Yes.
So this is where we're going to kind of end, and I feel like round up this conversation. So you'll make way more money self-publishing. So why the heck would somebody traditionally publish? You'll make way more money per book self-publishing.
Yes.
I'll say. I know because I've done it for a long time and I've made a lot of money
Yeah.
self-publishing. So why did I traditionally publish? Why does somebody traditionally publish?
Yeah, I'd say there are a few different reasons, and you should have a good reason to move to traditional publishing if you're coming from a self publishing background, because, like you said, the money per book is just not there. I think that if you are looking for, we talked about this a bit, but the prestige of having a traditional publisher behind you who has said, "I've edited this, I've chosen it, I have printed it," that says something to the world. Especially in a world where reporters, where influencers, where all of these people who are going to help you promote your book, are going to receive several books a day.
Yeah.
And some of them will be self-published, some will be traditionally published. And if they receive a book from HarperCollins or Penguin Random House, it's probably going to end up on the top of the stack, you know?
Yeah.
So there's that piece.
Somebody's already done the work to see whether this person and this idea is legit.
Exactly. Yeah. It's there's a value to curation, even though we, have some issues as gatekeepers. But I would also say, there's retail distribution, which is increasingly meaningless in an Amazon world, but a self-published book is never going to get into Target. It's hard to get books into Target, Walmart, Sam's Club, Costco, all these places, Barnes and Noble, of course, but like all of the kind of brick and mortar places, they'll only accept books from traditional publishers. So there's that piece of retail is important to you if you want to go for that. And then there's also the New York Times bestseller list. There are very few self-published authors who have made it onto the New York Times bestseller list. Offhand, I can think of David Goggins, and that's it. So,
but he even used a hybrid publisher.
Yeah, exactly. Well, there you go. See, that's
he used the Lion Crest. He used Tucker and Zach's thing, right?
Yeah, exactly. So even so, I mean, the New York Times generally even thinks of that as self-published. But still,
he just sold so many copies that
overwhelmed
at a certain point. Yeah, at a certain point, you just can't ignore it. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. But yeah, even so, I mean, there are many, many, many self-published books out there that have outsold more than half the books on the list, and will never hit the list.
Well, what did we talk about last week? So you sent me and all the authors that you work with the New York Times best-selling list every week, like who makes it and the number of copies that are sold, right? And last week I sent you an email back. I was like, this is the number that it takes to hit the list. I was surprised at how low it was, because like when I came out, I mean, this is a box set that I put out. Okay, I self-published it. It's a box set of books. When I first put this out, we sold 3,000 copies. We sold out the first printing of 3,000 copies in the first 10 hours. That would have been 1.5 times a book that made the New York Times bestseller list last week.
Yeah.
In terms of books sold, right?
Yeah.
I didn't even think we did another printing. We sold another 5,000 copies of these. Like, I didn't even think that that was a thing. But And there were books, like you said, there were books that sold more than that number of copies last week that didn't make the list because it's
Yeah.
editorialized. But
It is editorialized. It's hard, and you know, like I would, and I told you this too when we were talking about it. Like, is the New York hitting the New York Times bestseller list? Is it a good goal? Yeah, it's a good goal because it encourages good book selling behaviors. You're going to
yeah,
direct people to a bunch of different retailers. You're going to try to sell 10,000 copies in a week. That's good. Those are good goals. Whether or not you hit the list, like it's so editorialized that it's great if you hit it, but it's actually not a comment on you if you don't.
yeah,
So that's part of it. I'll also just say that in terms of the traditional publishing benefits, there is a huge benefit to having a editorial team, a design team that's kind
yes,
of tested, that works in this market frequently, that can give you also their sales team. And whether or not you're aiming to get it into retail, getting the feedback from the sales team to say, hey, this title, I actually don't think it's going to work in these markets because we've seen this happening in these
yeah,
titles. Or, ooh, a red cover, we tried to sell in a bunch of red covers and red covers are not working right now. It's like weird stuff like that,
yeah,
that ends up actually making a big impact. Or they'll give us feedback on like, we actually shouldn't print so many photos because we need to keep the price point lower if we want to sell a certain number of copies, like that kind of stuff. So these little bits of feedback that might seem inconsequential but can really add up to the success of your book. If you want a partner like that, that is really worth it.
Well, I think about, I mean, we've spoken a lot, you and I, about proper incentivization.
Yeah.
It's something I'm super passionate about.
Mm-hmm.
Is incentives need to line up. Self-publishing, the incentives don't line up. I've hired a lot of very good editors, designers, world-class people, like people who work for these big publishing companies, right?
Mm-hmm.
You can hire them now. You don't pay them $15,000 to edit the book, right? Like a good amount of money. But the problem is they edit the book and then they're gone. So they're good people. They do as good of a job as they possibly can, but they're gone. There's no real skin in the game. Whereas, and I've told you this many times, Jaidree, like the process with you to work on the proposal for the Obvious Choice book has made it by far and wide already the best book that I've ever written. And that's your expertise, but that's also an alignment of incentives.
Yes.
You don't make anything unless the book makes money.
Right.
And so you're only like yeah, you like me, I like you, but like it is a business relationship. Like your goal is to make this book a success, because if this book sells 1 million copies, which is the goal,
Yep.
then you're going to do pretty good.
Yeah.
As a result. And so
Yeah.
is your agency. And the same with the publisher.
Yes.
What I love about it is that there is an incentive alignment that's very distinct. Whether or not you agree on the specifics, you can hash that out. But it is, you cannot argue that both people are after the same thing, which
Mm-hmm.
is, we want this book to be as successful in the market as humanly possible. That's a really powerful element. I would argue the most powerful element to look for with anybody you work with is an alignment in incentives.
Mm-hmm.
And that does not exist with self-publishing.
No.
And that is one of the main reasons why I decided to go traditional. And I'm happy that I found a great agent too. Jaidree, thank you so much for this. This was fun.
Thank you. Such a good time.
For everything you've done too for this book and this idea. And yeah, we got more work to do.
So yeah, much to do.
We'll get off this recording, and then there's more work for you and I to do.
Yeah, I won't get you stuck in a thank you loop. Okay.
Okay. Bye-bye. Thank you.